Hello guys and welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Vijeta and today we will be continuing with our series of lectures which is the UGC NET English lectures, and this is the third lecture, and thank you all for listening to my previous two lectures. So yeah, we were doing the Greco-Roman poets and we shall continue with that. In my last class, I stopped at Virgil. I had to start with Virgil, so that is what I'm going to do. So, yeah, let us begin. So, Virgil has the timeline between 70 to 19 BC. So, he was called Publius Virgilius Maro, usually Virgil or Virgil in English, and he was an ancient Roman poet of the Augustan period. He's known for three major works of Latin literature: the Eclogues, the Georges, and the Epic, which is Aeneid. And this is a very widely asked question in UGC NET also, Virgil's Aeneid. So yeah, keep that in mind. A minor number of poems are collected in the Appendix Virgiliana, and they are actually attributed to him. You see, in the previous times, no proper methods of chronicling articles, chronicling works were there. So mostly it is stipulated that these works are written by the said writer. So that is that. His Aeneid has been considered the national epic of ancient Rome from the time of its composition to the present day. It is modeled after Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. A lot of the poets, they were influenced by each other, and they used to write, sometimes they imitated the other writers if they were influenced quite a lot by them. So that was that. Virgil's work has had wide and deep influence on Western literature, most notably on Dante's Divine Comedy, in which Virgil appears. He actually appears in it as Dante's guide through hell and purgatory. After considering briefly a career in rhetoric and law, the young Virgil turned his talents to poetry, just like John Keats, who pursued medicine for some time, but then he listened to his heart and, you know, went to poetry. And one should be glad of that, because if he had not done that, we wouldn't have had such a vast literature attributed to him. So that is that. Now, he was nicknamed Parlhenius or Maiden because of his social aloofness. So, yeah, Virgil was an introvert, like a lot of poets. The Augustan poet Ovid parodies the opening lines of Aeneid in Amours, and his summary of the Aeneid story in Book 14 of the Metamorphoses, the so called mini Aeneid. Ovid has also mentioned it in his Metamorphoses. Lucan's epic, the Bellum Olive has been considered an anti-Virgilian epic. So yeah, take that as you may. The Aeneid, an epic poem written between 29 and 19 BC, tells the legendary story of Aeneas, a Trojan who traveled to Italy, where he became the ancestor of Romans. It comprises of like 9,896 lines in dactylic hexameter. Now, this was about Virgil. We should come to Homer, and a lot of people know about Homer. He is widely known in the literary circles, and even outside of it, Homer is mentioned quite a lot in contemporary media or some stuff like that. He's referenced to a lot. So maybe a lot of you are more familiar with his name. So Homer's timeline is like between 12th and 8th centuries BC. He is best known for his works Iliad and Odyssey. He was believed by the ancient Greek to have been the first and greatest of all the epic poets. You see, he was like the OG poet, and he was the author of the first known literature of Europe. So he is central to the Western canon. He is where everything began, one can say. The importance of Homer to the ancient Greeks is described in Plato's Republic, which portrays him as, the first teacher of tragedies and leader of Greek culture. You see, probably we won't have Romeo and Juliet and the concept of tragedy if it weren't for, Homer. Homer laid the groundwork for tragedy in writing and literature. So, yeah, we owe literature, English literature actually owes a lot to Homer. The satirist Lucian, in his True History, describes him as Babylonian called Tigranos, who assumed the name Homer when taken hostage. Yeah. Now we come to the notable works of Homer. Odyssey. I think there is a slight typo. Sorry for that, and thank you for bearing with me. So the poem mainly focuses on the Greek hero Odysseus, known as Ulysses in Roman myths. Ulysses is also a novel by James Joyce. He was a modernist writer, and he has given a modern take to the myth of Ulysses. Even it's a poem by Lord Alfred Tennyson. So yeah, keep that in mind for your UGC NET MCQs. So yeah, Odysseus or Ulysses is the king of Ithaca, and his journey home after the fall of Troy is what is the poem is about. It takes Odysseus 10 years to reach Ithaca after the 10-year Trojan War, obviously, because in those times traveling was not so contemporary as it is today. There were no means and resources. So that is that. In his absence, it is assumed Odysseus has died, obviously, and his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, they have to deal with a group of unruly suitors because Penelope is a good catch. She's a wealthy widow. And the ministeris, I think it's called Nesteris, I'm not sure, but Nesteas, just keep in mind the spelling. And yeah, Nesteas, who compete for Penelope's hand in marriage. George Chapman, he translated it into English in 1616. So yeah, remember that because it's a very important question. It is asked in NET exams a lot. It is written in dactylic hexameter, and it is the sequel to the Iliad. Iliad, it is referred to as the Song of Ilion or Song of Ilium. It is an ancient Greek epic poem in dactylic hexameter sent during the Trojan War, which was between King Agamemnon and the warrior Achilles, which is like about 15,693 lines. Most of the literature in that era was centered around war and stuff like that, because you see, war was a contemporary thing back then. Right now we see war as something historical, but back then war was like the way of life. I mean, external war, we all are battling with our own wars, but these wars were like more external and more outdoorsy, if one may say that. So yeah, and his other not not very famous works, one can say, or not very widely discussed works in the UGC NET circle or in the UGC NET exams are like the Homeric hymn, which is a collection of 33 anonymous ancient Greek hymns celebrating the individual god in dactylic hexameter. So most of the poems were actually centered around God, war, myth, all of these things. Yeah, it tells you a lot about the mindset and the life and times of the people in that era, right? Epic cycle. It is a collection of ancient Greek epic poems that related the story of Trojan War, which includes the Cypria, the Ethiops, the so-called Little Iliad, Eleuperesis. I think it's called Eleuperesis. Eleuperesis. I think Eleuperesis. Yeah. The Nostoi and the Telegony in dactylic hexameter. So yeah, that was all about the Greco-Roman period, which laid the foundation of a lot of literature that we have today, a lot of movies and other sources of entertainment, storytelling, cinema that we have today. It laid the foundation, the groundwork for all of that. And yeah, we should be indebted to all of these poets, which have long gone, but their works still remain in the form of all these stories that we consume in the present day and age. So, yeah, That is something to be thought about. Anyways, moving on, we can talk about the British literature, and this is where everything begins. The canon of literature, one can say. And Geoffrey Chaucer, where everything begins. Geoffrey Chaucer, who laid the foundation of the British literature. He was born between 1340 to 1345, probably in London. His father was a prosperous wine merchant. In 1357, he was a page in the household of Elizabeth de Burgh, Countess of Ulster, wife of Prince Lionel. He was captured by the French during the Brittany expedition of 1359, but was ransomed by the king. Edward III later sent him to France on a diplomatic mission. So, Chaucer was a very important person. He belonged to the noble and the aristocracy household. He traveled a lot. He traveled to Genoa and Florence. Around 1366, Chaucer married Philippa Rodd, a lady in waiting in the Queen's household. Philippa's sister, Catherine Swynford, later became the third wife of John of Gaunt, the king's fourth son and Chaucer's patron. In 1374, Chaucer was appointed Comptroller of the lucrative London Customs. In 1386, he was elected Member of Parliament for Kent and also served as a Justice of Peace. In 1389, he was made Clerk of the King's Works. So you see, Chaucer was busy. He was a diplomat. He did a lot of important things. He was a very important figure back then. He oversaw the royal building projects, you see, justice, he was a justice also, everything he did it all actually. He held a number of royal posts serving both Edward III and his successor Richard II. So Chaucer lived during Edward III, whose reign was between 1327 to 1377, Richard II, whose reign was between 1377 to 1399, Henry IV, whose reign was between 1399 to 1413. So he served a lot of kings, he worked under a lot of kings. So that gave him a lot of experience and knowledge about the internal workings of the aristocracy. And he was the first poet to be buried in Westminster Abbey, which is now known as the Poets' Corner. Matthew Arnold, called him the father of English poetry. See, that's a big compliment. In the legends of good women, the 9 legends are Cleopatra, Thisbe, Dido, Hypsipyle, Medea, Lucrece, or Lucrece, I'm not sure, and Ariadne. Ariadne is also a character in The Halloween Party by Agatha Christie. She is actually the self insert of Agatha Christie in that novel. So, yeah, a little tidbit because I saw the name, so I thought I should talk about it. Philomela, Phyllis, and Hypermnestra. Dryden rewrote Canterbury Tales in modern English. John Dryden. He was the first national poet of England. Dryden said about him, "Here is God's plenty." And also, a rough diamond must first be polished ere he shines. I think this "and" is out of place here. Thank you for bearing with my little typos. And Boccaccio exercised a deep influence on Chaucer. On a diplomatic mission, he was sent to Italy where he met Petrarch and Boccaccio. He makes a clear reference of Petrarch in his Clerk's Tale also, I think owing to a lot of his travels, he was able to get a lot more perspective, a lot more material for his works, which is reflected in his works as well. His texts, if you read them, you will get this idea that it is written by a very well-traveled man. And yeah, he's also called the father of English poetry and grandfather of English novel. He's also called the morning star of song and the morning star of Renaissance. Arnold says about him, Chaucer lacks not only the accent of Dante, but also the high seriousness. I mean, not exactly a compliment, but yeah, take it as you may. He is the first one to use ottava rima in the Book of the Duchess. Ottava rima is the 8-syllable line in couplet rhyming. He first used heroic couplet in the legends of good women. Heroic couplet is 10-syllable line rhyming in couplets, that is decasyllabic couplet. He first used rhyme royal in Troilus and Cressida. Rhyme royal is a 10-syllable line arranged in 7-line stanzas, A, B, A, B, B, C, C. Chaucer's Troilus and Cressida is called a novel in verse. In the House of Fame, Chaucer resembles Dante's Divine Comedy. That's a very important question. It comes a lot. W.J. Long called the prologue to the Canterbury Tales as the prologue to the Canterbury Tales as the prologue to modern fiction because of its realism. The general prologue of the Canterbury Tales contains 858 lines. The general plan of the Canterbury Tales is taken from Boccaccio's Decameron. In Canterbury, the pilgrims could be seen going to Thomas Becket in the month of April. He gave 10 pictures of 21 pilgrims in his work. Yeah, that's a typo. And had Chaucer written in prose, it is possible his Troilus and Cressida, and not Richardson's Pamela, would be celebrated as the first English novel. That is what is said by S.D. Neal. Yeah. Edmund Spenser in his Faerie Queene called Chaucer well of English undefiled. Neville Coghill interpreted Canterbury Tales in 20th century English, and Albert called Chaucer the earliest of the great moderns and the morning star of Renaissance. Dryden called Chaucer the father of English poetry. So many praises by such great men. You see, common people who are not well versed in literature, obviously they will praise Chaucer, but a lot of great men have also praised Chaucer in the choicest of ways. Chaucer found his native tongue a dialect and left it a language. Wow, that is somewhat a phenomenal praise, I think, by Lewis. Chaucer is the earliest of the great moderns by Matthew Arnold. Again, a typo, and I'm sorry for that. If Chaucer is the father of English poetry, he's the grandfather of English novel by G.K. Chesterton. Here is God's Plenty by Dryden. Occleve wrote a famous poem, The Regiment of Princes, on the death of Chaucer. Chaucer and Langland, it's quite coincidental. They both died in the same year, which was 1400. Chaucer has been criticized for presenting about courts and cultivated classes, and he neglected the suffering of the poor, that is said, because, well, I think that Chaucer belonged to the nobility, so maybe he wanted to do justice to his work, which is the reason why he stayed in his comfort zone, one can say, although it is debatable. Yeah, but his works are mostly centered around the aristocracy and the high classes, the nobility, from where he belonged. Although in Canterbury Tales, 120 stories were planned, but only 24 were completed. So yeah, Chaucer, maybe he had a lot of duties, which is the reason why he couldn't complete what he planned. Chaucer introduced felicity in English. Longest tale of Chaucer's in the Canterbury Tales is the Knight's Tale. Chaucer has also been called the Prince of Plagiarists. So yeah, he has been called some names. I mean, some criticism is there. Obviously, who hasn't got criticism? Everybody faces criticism, even the greatest of men. Chaucer was not in any sense a poet of the people. Yeah, Hudson says that, criticizing his lack of representation of the lower middle class, low classes of people. The works of his life can be divided into 3 periods, though. The first period is the French period, of which we will discuss in the next class. And if you guys liked my video, give it a thumbs up. Comments are welcome. You can criticize me or tell me if there is some mistake. And if you like the video, as I've said already, give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel, and I will meet you all in the next video.